Theater Talk is made possible in part by the CUNY TV Foundation. This is Theater Talk. I'm Susan Haskins.
And I'm Michael Riedel of the New York Post.
And we are in Minneapolis.
We have a third host with us today for this special edition of Theater Talk. Joe Dowling has been the artistic director of the Guthrie Theater here in Minneapolis since 1995. And he's been very kind to have us to his theater to show us around this beautiful building that you have just opened, what, a couple of years ago now?
2 years ago now, yeah.
Now, Joe, literally above us, as he hovers above this theater and indeed this town, is Tyrone Guthrie, the founder of this great theater. Can you give me a sense of what it was that Guthrie, who had been a big West End director, a big Broadway director, indeed one of the most famous directors in his time, what he was rebelling against to come to Minneapolis to build a public theater?
I think Guthrie and his colleagues, Oliver Ray and Peter Zeisler, the three of them saw something in the 1950s that indeed was prophetic, and that was that with the advent of big, successful musicals, at that time it was My Fair Lady and so on, that the New York theaters were going to become, by and large on a Broadway level, were going to become sort of houses that would have long runs, couple of years, whatever, and that would squeeze out some of the particularly classic work that had been the norm on the Broadway season.
Sounds like that this is something that we could be talking about today.
They were prophetic. He puts it quite starkly. He thinks that in order to see theatre survive in the United States, what he would regard as kind of serious classical theatre or theatre that sort of embraced the literature of the past, it was essential to move out of New York City and out of the Broadway model. And of course we're talking about the 50s, before and off-Broadway and before the sort of not-for-profit movement became strong in New York. They asked Brooke Atkinson of the New York Times to put a piece in his column the following Sunday, asking cities around the country to apply, as it were. You know, they would go and start a theatre, a repertory theatre in that city, and he got 7 responses from cities all around the country. And they moved around, Oliver Ray and Peter Zeisler and Guthrie moved around from different city to city, met with the people, and one of the things that impressed him most here in Minneapolis was that the people who came out to meet him were men in their 30s. They were all men at the time, but they were men in their 30s who, he said, will support this theatre through good times and bad. They weren't the sort of grey-haired fathers of the city. They were the young princes, as it were. Yeah. And he eventually decided to put it here because he felt here would be a community that would support the theatre. He was an extraordinary man.
And now we're going to reveal, I think, Minneapolis in all its glory.
In all its glory.
This is a fabulous space. This is a fabulous space.
When we came down here to the river, and Jean Nouvel, our architect, our architect was absolutely determined that people would get this sense of the river.
Well, the entire reason for this city is because of the river. Exactly. I mean, this is the birth of the city is because of those falls, in fact.
You cannot think of a better metaphor for particularly for American theatre than the Mississippi River, which connects so much to the country.
In a way, though, it links up to Guthrie, too, because if you believe Guthrie coming from great sense and tradition of Shakespeare, Stratford-upon-Avon, theatres built along the river, and indeed the old Globe built along the Thames in London.
Yes. He said, you know, at some point in the future, the city of Minneapolis will recognize the power of the Mississippi River. At that point, the city had turned its back on the river and really was focused on the lakes. But he said, at some point, just as London finally has discovered the Thames, at some point Minneapolis will discover the river. Well, he was, as in so many other ways, he was prophetic because, and Jean Nouvel is, he's one of the great architects of the world. He's just won the Pritzker Prize. He's an extraordinary artist. And when he and I stood down on the site, and it was a parking lot at the time. That's what it was. And I mean, I didn't have the imagination that he had, because he said to me, I will not build your theatre for you unless you allow me to build it 50 feet in the air. And I mean, of course, I said, being a theatre person, that's ridiculous. People don't go to the theatre 50 feet in the air. You go in the door and you go out the door. Don't be ridiculous. And I spoke to our technical people who all just said, are you crazy? You're not going to agree to that. As the time went on, it became absolutely clear to me what he was thinking was that in order to embrace the river, in order to embrace the other features of this area, you had to be up at this level. You had to be able to see what we can now see. If you didn't see that, in fact, you were wasting the space. And then he started to talk about this building having a dialogue with the other buildings. And, you know, the rounded shapes, the square boxy shapes, all of them are reflected in those 19th century buildings. But by putting it in this color and by creating this kind of metallic quality to it, he gave it a very different modern, almost postmodern sort of quality.
Why the yellow windows? Why this yellow glow?
Well, because Jean Nouvel, our architect, he and I were looking at the model of the building, and he said, this studio, it will be for young people. And I said, yes, by and large, it'll be for young artists to grow and develop. And he said, well, then we must make the windows optimistic. He said, so that even if it's a grey day, it will look like it's sunshine. Which I thought was a lovely
it's a beautiful
idea, but of course it also fitted perfectly in with his colour scheme of the blue and the yellow, so he was making virtue of necessity to some extent. And this space we're on now is a cantilever. We're out on, there are 4 different cantilevers in this building, and this is one of them. And the bridge, of course, the endless bridge.
What was the theory behind the cantilever?
Well, again, it was Nouvel, but it's that sense of presenting the building, presenting it to the city, presenting it to the river, drawing people out towards it. You know, so in a sense, these cantilevers are the building stages, as well as obviously our 3 stages.
The Dowling studio, Joe. Now, your decision to put the name up there?
No.
Who came up with that one?
Well, it was some members of our board who decided that it was a useful way to raise funds if they actually decided to name it.
Because all that's missing is, I think, the headshot, your headshot, the Guthrie size headshot could go right up here.
There, yes. And that'll happen over my dead body. Oh, it's very empty today.
But this is a black box stage where you're doing experimental work and new work. What got you thinking that while you preserve the ethos of doing the classics, you need to move a non-profit theater like this into doing new, more experimental kinds of works?
I believe strongly that the living writer is the lifeblood of theater. I mean, we have to hear the voices of today that will become the classics of tomorrow. If we don't actually have a constant infusion of new work that allows us to hear the issues of now, then the classical work we do will seem out of date. Whereas if you balance the two up together, you get a sense of a continuum, you know, of human experience. When you get a new work, as we will have in the spring, for instance, from Tony Kushner.
Yes, you're doing a whole Tony Kushner.
We're doing a Tony Kushner celebration, yeah, and he's writing a new play which we've commissioned. Well, that will create its own momentum and its own energy, which lifts lifts the sense of who we are as a theatre force, not just in this region, but also throughout the world.
I don't really have any questions about the elevators, but they seem very comfortable. This is the smallest of the black box theaters, right?
Now.
These elevators are small, yes. It's performance art in there.
I noticed you have 11 bars here. At,
I know, 11, well, yeah, 11 bars.
We're lemon bars.
We're lemon bars. That's it.
Oh, this is good.
Do you
Yeah,
want to
this
be...
is our proscenium.
Is it always this red?
It is. This is
brothel. The brothel.
The brothel.
brothel red,
we
right?
tend to think of it as opera house. We don't tend to think of it as brothel. And perhaps that's just the difference between us in terms of our sensibilities. But there you go. What Jean Nouvel wanted here was, because the thrust, which we were recreating the original thrust, he wanted something very different. What he used to call he wanted a frontal system without those kind of side boxes that you get in a lot of proscenium theatres. And I was very keen on that too, because because of the balance between the different theatres, we wanted one where everybody had the same point of view, which you do in this theatre. It became very clear to me fairly quickly after coming here that there's an erroneous belief that every play can work on a thrust stage. There's this sort of, I hesitate to argue with our beloved founder, but he was of the view that it could all be done on a thrust stage. That's not true. Yeah. Plays of the late 19th, 20th and now 21st century are largely written for everybody, from a psychological point of view, from everybody to see the same thing at the same time. You don't in a thrust theatre. In a thrust theatre, people on the side see a different play from the people in front. And so the reason for this proscenium is quite specific, and that is that we have an opportunity to do late 19th century, 20th and 21st century plays here. Now, that's not to say that we won't do them in the thrust if we feel they're right. But we have the option, and we didn't have that before. So this is the way into the thrust stage.
Oh, this way. All
Do we
right.
want to go this way?
A lot of nice, comfy, roomy backstage area.
It is
We're going to see now the modern
version
of the famous
original
Guthrie thrust
yes,
stage.
yes. One of the things we were very careful about was to recreate the original theatre. As far as it was humanly possible, I wanted to make sure that the Guthrie Moseyevich Ralph Rapson theatre, he was the architect of the original theatre, was recreated here.
And what was Guthrie's theory of a thrust stage?
It brought the play closer to the audience. It created a dynamic between actor and audience that you can't get on a proscenium. The proscenium alienates and pushes people away. The thrust embraces people and brings them in. He also was very clear that plays of the 16th, 17th, and indeed 18th century were always played in houses that actually did embrace the audience in a much more immediate way than the proscenium. Once the proscenium arch became the order of the day, you've built that fourth wall,
right.
And the fourth wall in some ways closes you out because that's what a wall does.
Right.
He wanted to break down those walls. I'm of the view, and I won't be shaken from this view, that this is probably the best place in the world to play Shakespeare. Because it
a thrust stage, that style of stage.
This particular stage, you can go from the monologue that embraces the entire audience to a big battle scene in 2 seconds on this stage. You don't have to change any scenery to do that.
Right.
And he really did get it right. He and Tanya Moseyevich got it right.
So now where are we going?
We're heading to level 4 lobby, which is actually a very interesting part of this building because everybody who's going to one of our 3 theatres, whether it's the Thrust, the Proscenium, or the Studio, have to meet at level 4. And it creates, I think, a very real sense of community when you actually have people here in this middle space.
Here's the blue wall.
Blue wall, yes, that leads to the backstage area. Again, another one of Nouvel's teasers. He said, you know, it's like you see into the kitchen in a very great restaurant. You see into the kitchen and you wonder how are they doing things in there. So you can see backstage. Our technical crew are nervous of it because they have to keep everything very tidy back there.
Right.
They feel
Because you can literally see the workers between the theaters down there.
Yeah, you can't see the stagehands playing poker, huh?
No, they have to keep looking industrious. They are industrious.
This is Frank Butler, the director of production.
Very nice to meet you, Frank.
Very nice to meet you as
Now,
well.
explain to me this blue wall concept here.
The blue wall is really a part of a bigger vision the architect had to allow our patrons to see backstage a little bit, if darkly. The idea that he had was that he wanted the activity of the building to be something that was sort of viewed either through dark glass or in small sections. And so in this case, the audience is able to look backstage and see activity that's going on, whether it's stagehands walking around or actors
fighting with chorus kids.
Yeah, it could be that bit as well. Joe does call this Frank's wall because it's something that was done over my objection. But as long as if this is clean, then I'm okay with the whole deal.
So let's go backstage.
Okay, let's do it. Now we're on the other side of the the blue wall there. So this is the production link here, designed to facilitate getting scenery from the scene shop across the street here to one of the major performing spaces that we have.
So we're actually, when we walk through this area here, we are crossing the street. This is
we are going over 2nd Street. That is correct.
How long have you been with the Guthrie, Frank?
I've been with the Guthrie for 10 years. 10 years in May.
So you worked at the old theater?
I did. Yes, actually, I was there for about 3 or 4 years before we started working on this building. So a lot of the design of this particular building is informed by my experience in the old buildings, you know, things that worked. I call the Thrust Theater the world's biggest do-over because we got to take what we knew about the space and what we knew about the kind of art that we do in the space, right, and use that to inform choices that we make about the physical space itself.
And now you had a very famous and fancy French architect, Jean Nouvel, do this. Did he actually spend time with you to take into account your needs as running the backstage area?
Absolutely not.
That's hence the blue wall.
Absolutely not. Yes, the blue is not quite as blue as I was told it was going to be, but my experience with Jean was mostly through about 3 layers of his people, my people, that kind of thing. I can't say that, you know.
But you have a work of art.
For dinner.
You have a work of art in the building, though, that has to be a functioning, practical
Absolutely,
theater.
absolutely.
All right, so here's the scene shop.
So here we are.
Got
We're
a
in
lot
the
of
scene
space to
shop.
work here.
It's 20,000 square feet. 24-foot clear ceilings. The idea is that the shop is as tall as the scenery is, so we can build big, huge units here, put them on wheels, and just roll it right down the hallway and onto the stage.
How big was the scene shop in the old theater? Was this something that you got more space in the new theater for?
Yes, we did. But you know, no matter how much space you have,
not enough.
It's never enough.
In the old
It's
theater,
never
your shops
enough.
were all in different places. There
Well,
wasn't
we
all
had several
together.
off-site shops
Yeah.
as well. We went from about 4,000 square feet in the old building to an off-site scene shop that was 13.5 and to 20,000 square feet here. So it was quite a considerable jump in just square footage.
And we're meeting now the man in charge of the wheat for Little
Well,
House on the
I worked on
Prairie.
part of the wheat, yes. This is for Little House on the Prairie. We had some painted cane that they glued into the base here, and we actually did hot glue. You can tell we hot glued heads of wheat onto a vast majority of the tops of this. And these ride on these crates and slide in on the floor. This was all totally manufactured.
But what it shows you is that still, even though productions are now so big and so expensive, the theater still fundamentally is a very craft-intensive business.
absolutely.
I mean, you actually have to put
There
glue
were
these
5 or
things
6
on.
guys sitting here around all these things with hot glue in a big pan.
Bunch of nuns who went blind.
Yes, exactly.
Gluing
They're
the
doing
wheat
this,
heads on.
Holding it on. There's a little glass of water there, so you can stick your fingers in because they burn right after you put the hot glue right on there. And then you dip in your fingers and you're doing all that. So yeah, very hand intensive. All hand work on this. The painting as well.
And what are you in charge of here, Mike? What is your...
I'm not in charge of anything. Really. I'm
You're just restricted to the wheat, and that's it.
I'm a staff carpenter.
What do you do when the shows don't require wheat?
Well, I build other stuff. We are staff carpenters. There are 6 of us, 7 of us staff carpenters in the shop here. Calling us a carpenter is sort of a misnomer. We all have to be able to weld. We have to have some rudimentary hydraulic and pneumatic experience.
Some singing and dancing as well?
If possible, if they need to, right. If they need it, we're ready for that.
Fill the chorus out there a little.
Yeah, absolutely.
How many people do you employ in your section of the theater?
I have about 85 full-time staff.
Full-time?
Full-time staff. We're year-round. This is Denise.
Denise, what are you doing?
Hello, Denise.
We're building this fake brick up to look like better fake brick.
And what is this
what's
for?
gonna
What
be
show
for?
is this
This is
for?
for a view from a bridge.
Ah, I see. So this is Brooklyn brick.
Yeah.
Yeah, very
So,
good.
and then it'll get painted again, repainted. This is the way it comes. It's not very nice.
And
Do
what's
you
it
work
made
here
out of?
full-time?
Yes.
And how long have you been here?
I've been on staff for since 2002, but I've worked for the Guthrie since '97 as overhire.
Hey, what is this made out of?
This is
Sort
made
of
out
a-
of masonite.
And you're going to make it look like real brick, and that's the
Yeah,
illusion and magic of theater.
And then we'll
Right.
repaint it.
Is that a real comb or is that
It's a real comb.
That's your comb, isn't it, Susan?
Yeah. that's my makeup brush,
I
Michael.
hate it because
Okay.
it's too sharp. These prongs were too sharp. So this is what it gets used for now.
But this is just the scene shop. This is but just a small part of your empire.
That's
So
right.
let's go on to the other shop.
Yes.
We know where
All
the
right,
real
well, let's
power.
check
We know
out-
where the real
Yeah.
power is
That's
in this
right.
theater. It's right back here.
Let's see. Let's take the stairs. Let's take the stairs.
Here we go.
Now we're coming into the costume shop. The space here that you'll see is for fabric storage. You can see we have quite a bit of stock just to construct the costumes from. The vast majority of our costumes are made by hand. Here's a good example here.
Look at this
Jean
place.
is working on a dress.
I'll be wearing that tonight for the panel, right, Jean? Thank you. We did the fitting.
Frank, tell us about the floor.
There's a layer of foam actually below it. So for the folks who spend many hours on their feet, it's a little bit more
Like Jean
comfortable
here.
to do.
That's
Yeah.
the thing. That you've got Jean's back in mind.
We got her back.
That's right.
We
Okay.
absolutely have her back.
Okay, what's next?
Let's head this way.
Thank you, Jean.
Thank you. Thank you.
Actually, it's pretty calm right now. Generally, it's much more
Everybody industriously
happening.
working.
Yes,
on
the
this.
hubbub, but
Much
you
more
see
of a
many
happening
workstations.
space. Yes, absolutely.
Bolts of cloth. Oh, look, you've got some wonderful old sewing machines here.
Oh yeah, they don't make them like they used to.
Hi, what are you doing? What are you working on? Pants, oh, okay.
This store.
Yep.
Good luck with the pants.
Let's see if Doreen's available.
It's shoe day.
It's shoe day in the dye shop.
The actors are gone, and we can have the shoes. So today,
So these are Little House on the Prairie shoes?
these are Little House on the Prairie shoes.
All built by you? All built specifically
Not
for this production?
built, but they all
Distressed.
can't be like shiny and
Brand new, right?
and
No, they're
brand
doing some
new.
scuffing.
They're on the prairie, so
So you scuff them up, huh?
So Doreen,
and
how
shoes
long-
make the outfit, you know. So
And the dye makes the shoes. And notice the dye jars, and this is just to dye things, this room, right?
dye and paint. I've been doing a lot of painting on the clothes.
Do you dye actors' hair for opening night parties?
No hair. That's Ivy. That's Ivy. She
I
does-
can tell.
That's across the hall. Let's go to the wig run room.
The wig run room.
Ladies and gentlemen, can I just interrupt? We've got a tour with some cameras and things like that. So,
Let's bring them in.
It's always nice to have advanced warning. These are the wigs for Little House on the Prairie, and as you can see, they're all being restyled. Monday is our big restyling day because no shows on Monday. So we have overnight if things need to dry overnight.
Right.
And you can see we just use rollers like in the salon.
Is there something you can do about this on me?
I
little-
find that
little wig
shape of
here that I
hairline by far more attractive than a straight across hairline.
Thank you so much.
Thank you with
And
that.
I'm not just BSing you.
I'm very happy to hear that.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. It was very nice to meet you.
we're just outside the wig run room now. This is where the actors would, after they've changed out of their street clothes, maybe putting on a bathrobe and wearing a wig cap to get their wigs put on before they get the costumes put on. While that's happening, the audience is coming in for attending the performance. It's at the same time. It's really amazing sort of phenomenon because most people don't look up. If you were to look up, you would see the actors in a bathrobe and a wig cap getting ready.
Well, how
to
come
get
the
their
actors
wigs
don't
on.
get a blue light though, the way the stagehand do?
You know, I don't know.
I'll have to have Jean Nouvel that one.
Have Mr. Nouvel tell us about that story. But
So I guess the theory is that the whole theatrical experience really begins long before you actually settle into your seat when the curtain goes up.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm very happy now to be joined by the wonderful actor Charles Keating, who has a long history with the Guthrie Theater. Charles, nice to see you.
Great to be here.
Now, you met Tyrone Guthrie in 1968, I believe. Give me a sense of Guthrie's personality as a director. I mean, was he intimidating to young actors?
Yes, he was intimidating because you knew there was an extraordinary intellect here at work. I found it very difficult, actually, early on. He
Why?
was so grand and so beautifully spoken, and you knew that there was this huge history that he was carrying with him that you wanted. I remember I said, I brought a tape recorder in. He said, "Oh, no, dear boy, don't do that, don't do that." I said, if you were me, wouldn't you do it?
Yeah.
He said, "Don't you understand, dear boy? It's all writ on water. It's all writ on water." But he made you feel you were an equal.
His sort of view of Shakespeare was that he did a lot of contemporary dress productions of Shakespeare.
Yes.
That it should not be the declaimed style, but more fluid and more flexible for a new generation.
Absolutely. And the tempi that he always wanted, that he was fast. He wanted his characters to think very fast. 7 lines on a breath, 10 lines on a breath. No, dear boy, I want 26 pounds of diaphragmatic pressure. Okay. The rehearsals were always very alive like that.
And what was Minneapolis, the city, like when you first came here in 1968?
Extraordinary.
Yeah?
Extraordinary. It still is. You see, what's interesting, in the early 60s, Guthrie had this dream. And he and this community realized it. What's equally wonderful is he and Dowling are similar in as much as they're both dreamers, big dreamers, and both Irish, which is interesting. And Joe has reinvented that dream that Guthrie had originally, that lasted for, well, it's close to 50 years, isn't it? Our revels now are ended. And these our actors, as I foretold you, were all spirits and are melted into air. into thin air. And like the baseless fabric of this vision, the cloud-capped towers, the gorgeous palaces, the solemn temples, the great globe itself, yea, all which it inherits shall dissolve. And like this insubstantial pageant faded, leave not a rack behind. We are such stuff as dreams are made on, and our little life is rounded with a sleep.
Right here, buddy. That's the one.
You must be very relieved.